Welcome to Networking RX, a podcast devoted to helping business professionals like you enhance your networking skills in order to become more proficient giving and receiving quality business referrals and improving the overall quality of your life and the lives of those around you. The Networking RX podcast is a production of AmSpirit Business Connections, an organization whose mission is to empower business success through networking.
Welcome back to the Networking RX podcast. I am your host, Frank Agin, founder and president of AmSpirit Business Connections. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for subscribing. If you've been with this program for a while, certainly since the beginning of 2020, I interviewed a gentleman, a professor at University of Michigan, Dr. Wayne Baker, who had released a book called All You Have to Do Is Ask. And I got a copy of the book and I read the book. And there are a few things that jumped out at me, and we'll talk about some of these here and there. But the one thing that jumped out at me, I guess before I get too far along, that interview was episode 140, and it was released on the 14th of January, if you want to go back and take a listen to it. Really good book. And I guess just the premise of the book is what separates us from the things we want in life is not the generosity of others, but it's really our ability or inability to ask. We don't ask enough. And in reading the book, there was one thing that jumped out at me. There was one portion, one little passage that jumped out at me. And what it was is that Dr. Baker made a distinction between what he calls autonomous help-seeking and dependent help-seeking. And it was just a small piece of the book, and it really kind of got me thinking. Actually, got me thinking to the point where I actually went online and saw what other kind of resources were out there. He actually had a footnote that referenced other research that had been done, and so I kind of dug into it. But, well, I guess let me first explain what is autonomous help-seeking versus dependent help-seeking. Autonomous help-seeking is simply us trying to learn so we're better equipped going forward. Dependent help seeking is essentially just asking somebody to kind of do it for us. An example that I had heard, actually I was on a webinar that Dr. Baker gave a few weeks after he was on the podcast. He gave a webinar and somebody asked a question related to this, what's the difference between the two, if you could elaborate on it. And what Dr. Baker used as an example was his own interactions with his son and his iPad. And if he's having an issue with his iPad, obviously, Dr. Baker is he's not I don't call him a baby boomer, but he's not a millennial either. But at any rate, if he's having issues with respect to doing something on his iPad, he might turn to his son, who I have trouble with labels, but his son, who's more technically savvy, as my kids are, turns to his son and says, "Hey, can you show me how to do this?" His son might grab the iPad and just quickly do it, and then hand the iPad back. And essentially what his son has forced upon him is dependent help seeking. Hey, I did it for you. And what Dr. Baker's looking for is to be autonomous and like, listen, can you show me how to do it so I don't have to ask again? So that's the difference between autonomous help-seeking and dependent help-seeking. Again, autonomous help-seeking is asking in order to learn how to fix a problem, whereas dependent help-seeking is just asking somebody to fix it for us. Now, why does any of this matter? I don't know that it makes a huge deal, but I notice with respect to myself, and maybe you're similar to this, but I notice with respect to myself that there are times when people come to me looking for help that I'm all in. I really want to help them. And then there are other times when they're coming to me for help where I find it to be exhausting. And once I read this passage in Dr. Baker's book, All You Have to Do Is Ask, once I read that passage, I got to thinking a little more about why I get frustrated when certain people ask me things, and I'm energized when other people ask me things, And mind you, this is all just a sample size of one. I have no research to support this. I looked, there really is nothing to this. There's research I'll talk about here in a minute. But this is just kind of my own conjecture. This is my own opinion on it, my own thoughts on it. But what I find is that when people come at me with autonomous help seeking, I'm energized because they want to learn and I'm going to empower them. I'm not going to have to do it again. Teach me how to tie my shoes. I'm all in on that. And I realize it's kind of a whimsical sort of an example, but teach me how to tie my shoes. I'm going to put a little more time into that. I'm going to invest time in that because I realize if that pays off, I'm not going to have to tie your shoes ever again. But if you're asking me to tie your shoes, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, I got to do this over and over and over again, and that gets annoying, gets frustrating. It's de-energizing, if you will. Now, I mentioned I was looking for some research out there, and Dr. Baker does reference research. There is a professor of psychology at Tel Aviv University, it's over in Israel, Ari Nadler, he's a professor there, and he did research on this, and what he was trying to determine with respect to autonomous help seeking and dependent help seeking, whether there were circumstances which would lend someone or nudge someone to be one more than the other. And so he did testing, and there certainly is an argument for dependent help seeking, right? And one of the things that Dr. Nadler talks about in his study early on is he uses the example of, let's say, a piece of office equipment breaks down. One worker will wait for the technician to fix it while the other will, try and figure it out or ask for help so he can fix it. Now, the argument there is listen, if you're an accountant or an attorney and you're making hundreds of dollars an hour, nobody wants you fixing a copy machine or whatever it might be. Nobody wants you taking the time to learn how to fix it. Stay in your lane, do what you do, and make your money doing what you do. And so I get why you would, in that situation, dependent help seeking is important, and autonomous help seeking is not. But there are certainly circumstances, and I look at networking as maybe being one of those circumstances where you want people to be autonomous help seeking, because people come at me and they'll ask for. Now, dependent type help seeking would be somebody who's asking, hey, refer me a client that's going to engage me on this $25,000 consulting project. That's dependent help seeking in my mind. We can certainly argue about it, but it's almost like, here, hand me somebody, refer me to somebody who's got a check with my name on it. And to me, that's kind of exhausting because it's like, oh, geez, I'm doing all the work. I'm doing all the work. Now, chances are I don't know people like that, and I tell people all the time, I don't necessarily know people like that. And if you're coming to me looking for those sorts of things, chances are if somebody's coming to me and saying, hey, I need somebody to help me, and I've got $25,000 to pay for it, I will find them somebody. I'll find them somebody in a hurry. So it's not like those engagements are just kind of hanging out there. But when people ask me those sorts of things, it kind of gets exhausting or I feel a sense of exhaustion, I should say, because partially I don't really have an answer for it, and I don't really know how to get an answer for it. Well, I do know how to get an answer for it, and it's probably a 5 or 6 step process going from one person to the next, to the next, to the next. And it's really something they ought to be doing. But they are being very dependent and looking to me for help. And it's a similar thing with respect to not-for-profit organizations. I'll have not-for-profits that'll approach me and say, listen, you could really help us if you could get us a $50,000 donor to take care of our summer program. Okay, I could really help you doing that, but that's a big ask. That's a big ask, and I don't necessarily know somebody who has $50,000 to take on the summer program. I might, and if there was somebody out there that had $50,000 they were looking to do some sort of charitable endeavor with, chances are they're going to find it or somebody's going to find them in a hurry. So, those things aren't just hanging out there waiting to be connected. The autonomous type ask is that person looking for that consulting project who might say, this is ultimately what we're trying to sell, but how you could really help us is if you could connect us to a speaking opportunity so we could get in front of more people who might purchase this consulting project. Or a better way to put it is they're coming to me and they're looking for help in taking the various steps that need to be taken to get to somebody who's going to buy the $25,000 speaking engagement. Or back to the charity, somebody who's coming to me and saying, listen, we have this program, this summer program, and it is $50,000. It would be great if we found somebody who could just give us $50,000 and take all our trouble away. But if we piece all this up, here are different things that people can help, and maybe you can help with little aspects of this or point us in the direction of different steps that we could be taking to help us accomplish this. That's more of an autonomous ask. And I find myself more energized in those situations. And maybe you're different. Maybe it's just me. But I find myself more energized in those situations when people come to me and are looking to really kind of solve the problem rather than have me solve the problem for them. And again, I don't have any research that says, I'm any different than anybody else or everybody thinks this way. I don't have any research. It's just my own opinion. But it just seems to me that you're better off, we're better off, I'm better off by trying to get help in taking steps to solve problems, or learning to solve problems, taking steps to tackle the big issues, as opposed to just hoping that somebody can just hand us what we need. And especially if we're looking for things that are sort of large in nature. $25,000 consulting project. Somebody to buy my franchise is a big ask. Speaking opportunities is a big ask. Those things are big asks, and they're few and far between that somebody's really going to have that situation in hand. Yeah, I have somebody who needs a speaker, and they've got money, and it's just, the check is written. They just need to know who to make it payable to. Those things don't necessarily happen. So there's not really a whole lot to this discussion other than to kind of think about the types of things you're asking for. Are you making dependent asks? Are you looking just for the end? Just do it for me. Or are you making autonomous asks? Can you help me? Can you sit and brainstorm this problem with me? I'm willing to bet, and again, don't have any research to support it, but I'm willing to bet that if your asks are more autonomous, you're probably going to get a better result because people are going to be willing to invest that time. Back to my original comment. I'm willing to invest time to teach you how to tie your shoes because I know that'll save me time in the future, not having to continually tie your shoes. Just something to think about. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind people that we are looking for franchisees for our AmSpirit Business Connections. This is a unique opportunity in that it's geared for somebody to add on to what they're already doing. All of our franchisees do something else for a few hours in the morning, a few days a week. They are working the AmSpirit Business Connections program. Generally, it's early morning, 7 to 9 o'clock. The rest of the day, there are attorneys, accountants, realtors, coaches, consultants of various kinds. Again, all of our franchisees do something else. If you have an interest in this program, if you have an interest in talking about it, if you know somebody who's interested, please have them contact me using the email in the show notes or the one we provide at the end of the podcast, which is right now.
Thanks for joining us on the Networking RX podcast. Please put what you've learned into action today and let us know if you have questions, comments, or ideas for future topics. You can email them to us at podcast@amspirit.com. That's AmSpirit.com. Finally, so you never miss an episode, be sure to subscribe to the Networking RX podcast through iTunes, Overcast, or however you receive your podcasts. Now get out and network with someone.
The Networking RX podcast is the copyright production of AmSpirit Business Connections. All rights reserved.